Welcome to the campus of North Idaho College and today's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist, Tony Stewart.
Today we wish to start a 4-week series on the topic American political humor. In order to deal with this, we wish to delve into several areas of political humor as it relates to American journalism. We're going to talk about editorials and commentaries and cartoons, and in the field also of American comedy. To start our program, it's my very special privilege to welcome to our program an individual who's been most successful in the field of journalism, Mr. Bill Hall, who is presently the editor of the editorial page at the Lewiston Morning Tribune. He has been with that paper over 17 years, and during that time has become so well known for his outstanding editorials and his commentaries, and while doing that, oftentimes dealing with very important and serious subjects in a very humorous way to make a very important point or message to people. In addition to his work there, he is a syndicated columnist, and his writings are published in a number of newspapers. In addition, he is the author of 2 books, and I have one of those books with me now that I wish to show you. Is entitled Son of Killer Chicken, and he's also written one called Killer Chicken. Those are available at bookstores in our area. Mr. Hall, it's a pleasure to have you on our program.
Thank you.
I'm happy to welcome to the program to question our guest today. First of all, regular panelist Mary Lou Reed, and a member of the faculty at North Idaho College, visiting panel member Richard Snyder, and also regular panelist Janelle Burke. And I will invite Lou Reed to commence the questioning.
Well, Bill, it's fun to have you here. I've been reading your columns for a number of years, and the first question I'd like to ask you is, do you like your work? Is it fun trying to make the editorial pages laughable?
I don't think it'll surprise you to learn that I look forward to going to work each day.
And what do you like about what you do?
Usually I will be reading the morning newspaper. I like to do that almost every day, whether it hurts or not. And I will see something in there that's a wonderful straight line, something the president has said or the governor has said or some local politician has said, and I can hardly wait to get down to my word processor and try to bounce some jokes off of it.
Can you sort of describe how you go about getting all this down on paper?
Well, when you have to write 4 columns and 6 editorials a week, you're hungry for ideas. We all write humor columns all day long. We're always making jokes about the president or the governor. We're quipping all day long, and some of those lend themselves to some elaboration. And I am compelled to pay attention when that's going on. If someone else says something I think I could work with, or I say something funny and everybody laughs, I carry a little idea booklet with me. And I write down every idea I get, which will be 15 or 20 ideas a week normally. And then I will choose the best for the idea that grabs me.
But it is work, isn't it? It isn't. It sounds like fun, it sounds like play, but I suspect that there's quite a bit of discipline involved in your craft.
Well, writing and rewriting, I spend anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, usually around 3 hours, on a column. That's not very much to a writer of a novel or something like that to turn out that much that fast, but it makes you sweat a little bit.
Do you still laugh at the final rewriting?
Not the final rewriting so much, but when I write a column, a humor column, I will try to get in a zany mood, and I'll start kind of, I call it raconteuring, just the same sort of thing we all do around the dinner table, perhaps. And I'll start elaborating on this idea. And when you do that, funny thoughts pop into your head. They come out of the ether somewhere, and they're funny to me when they happen, too. So if you walk into the Tribune on first draft, you'll see me sitting there cackling at my own stuff. And you might think it's vanity, and you're absolutely right. It's pretty funny sometimes.
Richard Snyder.
Bill, you're known for your insertion of humor into editorials about causes or whatever. Why humor instead of the, in quotes, serious approach to editorials? Certainly, most of the papers I see, take a look at the editorial page, and there's some rather drab, academic kind of approach to explaining a problem or trying to encourage me to do something. Why would you insert humor to try and achieve the same kind of message?
Well, you put your finger on one reason, and that's drab. I don't like drab, boring editorials written from the Mount myself, and so I don't expect anyone else to. And I do try to make the editorials conversational. As I said earlier, if we talk politics in this country, we all make jokes about each other's views and about the president and everybody else. And so why not do that in a morning newspaper? I also think a morning newspaper, of all papers, should be outrageous and interesting, because it's duty to help you get your heart started in the morning. Man your age probably has as much difficulty as I do. And so that's the main reason. It's just for the fun of it, not to put everybody to sleep. There's a couple of newspapers in this part of the country I could mention that I read them and I fall asleep in my eggs. And if you've heard I have egg on my face, it's true, but it comes from other newspapers. But the main reason for using humor is it's effective. And I like everyone else involved in the political world, to be effective. I have some ideas, and I hope to put them across. And most of all, I hope to puncture the pompous balloons of some people I don't agree with. And humor is ably suited to do that. And there's no people who use humor are often looked upon kindly, I think, whereas stern preachers are not. And it's the humorous politicians who are the vicious SOBs, because they're using the sharpest weapon there is.
Janelle Burke.
Do you ever get criticized for your writings? And can you share with us some anecdotes, perhaps, about criticism? And how do you feel about being criticized when you've written about something that's political?
Well, no one has ever criticized me. I get criticized royally all the time. I'm very pleased and proud of the fact that the person criticized most often, year in, year out, day after day, on the editorial page of the Lewiston Tribune is the editorial page editor. You're looking at him. They really come back at me, and that's the way it should be. And it takes some years to develop a little bit of a thick skin to where you understand that that's important and necessary, and it goes with the territory, and besides, it licenses you to dish it out. So you get used to that. But there are certain criticisms that I will never get used to. I hope I will never get used to. One is when I feel on reflection I was wrong, and I say that letter writer has a point. That's kind of embarrassing, but that's what readers are there for, is to help editorial writers make a fool of themselves. And I make a very good living doing that, unlike college professors who do the same thing and don't get paid so well for it. But society has its priorities. And I also don't care too much for people who write in and appoint themselves the high priest or priestess of liberalism and presume to tell me that something I wrote wasn't liberal. I'm supposed to be generally a liberal editorial writer, but I really just try to say what I think is correct and let others put labels on it. But I do concede that probably 80% of the time what I say is liberal. And then to have some leader of some movement announce that I'm being excommunicated from some liberal church that I didn't want to belong to in the first place irritates me a little bit. Other than that, criticism goes with the territory.
Bill, we're going to deal with some of your books a little later in the program, but I want to get into something that we were not able to at the speech today, and I would like to say to our viewers the speech to the student body was very exciting and stimulating. There's a lot of areas to cover, and this is a presidential election year, and a lot of our viewers are getting very interested in what's happening, and since you have covered politics for so many years and you're so clever in doing that, I would like to give you the name of at least who appears to be the front runners or who may be in the picture for a while to come, and as I name them, let you give us your reaction to them. We'll start with the Republican Party and the incumbent president, Ronald Reagan.
Oh, Ronald Reagan. You're going to let me make as big a fool of myself as the other analysts have already this year. But what the hell, you bought me lunch. Ronald Reagan is, unless lightning strikes somewhere, is going to be reelected president of the United States. People are happy with what he's doing. I am not, but for some reason the majority hasn't been listening to me lately, and the majority in this country likes Ronald Reagan. They like his style, and only a major screw-up could top them. Well, I'd say one of two things: involvement in a military fashion in something like Lebanon, I think, would not go down well at all, and the people wouldn't stand for it. Or if the economy should turn sour by election time, and that is apparently unlikely. But I think Reagan is a spokesman. Reagan is doing what I did in Washington. I was a press secretary. Reagan is a press secretary for an oligarchy. He does not run the government. No president does, but he less than most presidents. And he is a spokesman for this board of directors that is running the country now.
His running mate, George Bush.
Is that his name? I can never remember it. Whatever happened to him, anyway. I've never known a vice president who was so anonymous as George. What's his name? And that's saying quite a bit, because some of them get lost. I think the reason for that is rather obvious. There's a lot of Reagan loyalists in the White House who don't trust vice presidents. Most presidential staff don't trust most vice presidents. And I wouldn't be too fond of you either if I knew I had to die for you to get ahead. It does color their relationship. And so I think Bush has been asked to be seen and not heard and not seen very much. And he's going along because he doesn't want to alienate those folks. He wants to be a good soldier and maybe pick up some of their support in 4 years when he runs for president.
Walter Mondale.
Walter Mondale is probably one of the most knowledgeable people on the White House to ever run for president, because Jimmy Carter did something that I've never known a president to do. Perhaps some historian on this campus will correct me, but at least in my lifetime, there's never been a vice president brought inside the White House to the extent Walter Mondale was, and he was not accorded the horrified treatment that most vice presidents are. So in that vein, I would say that Walter Mondale is about as well informed on the presidency as a textbook, and about as interesting to be with.
Gary Hart.
I am mystified at what's happening with Gary Hart, except in reaction to Mondale. Mondale is a bit dull. Mondale, more importantly, is the front runner. I think people like to cut down a front runner, and I think people resent laborers trying to dictate his choice to the Democratic Party. There's some of that at work, but I've met Gary Hart many times, and he's a nice, quiet fellow. I would say he's smarter than I am, but dumber than most senators. And he has no pizzazz. He doesn't have the sort of pizzazz that you normally expect from a candidate doing this well. Maybe women voters see something in him that I don't, but thank God. But I'm mystified by him.
John Glenn.
John Glenn, I saw that movie the other night, The Right Stuff, and I was astonished because I've been reading from political commentators some weeks ago, that this movie was giving him an unfair advantage and might really put him over as the presidential nominee, painting him as a hero. It paints him as a fool. It paints him as, in the words used in the movie, Dudley Do-Right, and Goody Two-Shoes. And it makes him look like the sort of guy you'd hire to mow your lawn, because he wouldn't steal the lawnmower, but you wouldn't want him marrying your sister or your White House.
Okay. And Jesse Jackson.
Jesse Jackson, I have always thought, to be blunt about it, was a bit of a racist, and I think that came to the fore the other day. For perhaps understandable reasons, he doesn't like white people very much. He thinks we all eat watermelon and have natural rhythm. And you do, but I don't. But he does tend to categorize us the way North Idaho rednecks do black people. And that's unfortunate, in some ways more tragic, I suppose, than a black man. But I love presidential campaigns, the American presidential campaigns, the long, expensive ones that everybody dislikes in this country. I think our people with problems, or the problems of our candidates, are almost always revealed over the course of a campaign, and I think Jesse Jackson has a little problem in that. I think he's a bit of a racist, and I think we saw an example of it. It was not a slip of the tongue. It was, I think it was characteristic of Jesse Jackson.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you joined our program in progress, our guest is Bill Hall, who is the editor of the editorial page of the Lewiston Morning Tribune. And we are in a 4-week series with you discussing American political humor, and we shall continue the questioning with Mary Lou Reed.
Well, Bill, I want to give you an opportunity to brag, and I think you really do delight in being outrageous. This is what you're looking for in political humor. Could you give us a couple examples of when you were the most outrageous in print? What do you delight in looking back on?
Well, I said earlier today at the Popcorn Forum that the Jerry Falwell people have kept me afloat the last few years. Actually, most members of the Reagan administration, now that Watt's gone, are pretty dull. And
those are your favorite targets, but are you necessarily the most outrageous when you're writing about them?
I think I used to be a reporter myself, so I seem to recognize somebody fishing for something, and you're trying to give me a clue of what I'm supposed to say.
Well, I really think that you probably have said some things in print that have brought in a lot of responses, and in which they really felt that you were way.
Well, I'll tell you, it may surprise you. The things that raise the most keen are strictly local, and you would never have heard of them. A newspaper is at its courageous best while fighting City Hall. It's a lot tougher to fight City Hall than the State House or the White House, because if you attack the mayor demonstrably has friends all over town, or he wouldn't be the mayor, and that offends people. And most mayors kind of think that the local newspaper should be the kind of the Chamber of Commerce organ, as they call it, build up our town. That means say nice things about the mayor. And you really get a lot of heat when you say something like that. And the biggest row I ever got in my life was when a powerful local merchant painted his business orange in violation of zoning laws, just make it deliberately garish, and I referred to the paint color as parrot vomit. And that was a thunderclap, and people still talk about it. I know you expected me to say something about the president. But
No. That is exactly the kind of example I was asking for. And my next question is it still the same color?
Yes, it is. I was as effective as usual.
Richard Snyder.
Bill, I assume in some manner or another you kind of survey the political humor situation throughout the United States, perhaps not in depth, but what do you think the condition of political humor is in the United States in the 1980s? Are things going along pretty much as usual, or going downhill? Are we getting better?
Well, as one who's trying to hustle his column all over the United States right now, I regret to inform you that there's an awful lot of very good humor writing going on in this country. I have an awful lot of competition. I'll pick up some little paper somewhere and read somebody I've never heard of. I was reading some guy in the Vancouver Columbian over by Portland the other day, and first-rate stuff. I wish I'd written that. And part of it is I think we're in a lighter mood in this country now, and I may be typical of that. Until 5 years ago, I was writing serious political analysis as a column. And after Watergate and the Vietnam War and student unrest and those 20 years of turmoil that we all went through, that's how you and I got gray, I think. It's hard to believe you're only 35. And after that, I was tired of politics for a while. I wanted to kind of shift into a more humorous gear, and I think I'm following the country on that. I think the country is a little tired of heavy politics right now. Maybe that's why they like a guy like Gary Hart. He doesn't put much pressure on them, and he does have a lovely hairdo.
Well, didn't you tell us earlier today that you took the advice of Mary Poppins? Spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down a little easier.
Yeah, humor helps people accept your lectures a little bit better. I think more preachers would do better if they'd wear a fright wig once in a while. Politicians too.
Janelle Burke.
Last time I asked you about criticisms. I wonder if this time you could tell us about times when you have been quoted or cited by people that you've written about, when your column might have been effective in influencing politicians.
Well, like most people who try to influence politicians, I can rarely see a direct effect. I know quite a few situations where I think I could say if it had been for me and 25 other people, that bill never would have happened, or the bill never would have been vetoed. But you would be surprised how ineffective I am. I'm not any longer. But it rarely happened. One day I wrote an editorial saying a piece of legislation in the Idaho legislature was foolish. It was in violation of the First Amendment, so on and so forth. And my phone rang that morning, and it was the legislator sponsoring the legislation, and he said, "I thought you should know I read your editorial, and I've decided you're absolutely right, and I'm withdrawing that bill." And my reaction was, "No kidding, who is this really?" That had never happened before. I remember one case where somebody on the governor's staff called and said, the governor's going to veto that bill as you suggested. Do you mind if we borrow some of your words for the veto message? And I was very pleased because we all know how much help the governor needs with his words these days. But that sort of thing rarely happens.
I have another question, and that has to do with how do you maintain your humor? Do you have a rule of thumb as to how you maintain your humor, but you're not malicious? In other words, you poke fun at people, but you don't hurt them.
Well, sometimes I suppose I hurt them and I set out to. I mean, I hurt their ideas. But the standard I try to follow is I would never play as rough with just some third-grade teacher or policeman doing their duty, and not presuming to ask for public love as I would with a governor or a senator. I would not treat some people the way the readers treat me. It's just a different league, and different things are permitted.
Bill, I would like for you at this time to refer to your books. The two books that you have published deal with your works and on different issues, and I know that you use your humor to deal with very serious topics, and oftentimes these are national issues as well as the issues of our area. And I would like to invite you at this time to take an example from one of your books and show us through the reading of that how you do use that kind of humor.
Well, I think the point you're asking me to repeat from what I made this morning was that humor, when I'm funniest, sometimes I'm most serious about what I'm saying. And Phyllis Schlafly, the anti-feminist leader, said something a few years ago that was, I thought, horribly damaging. She suggested that in her fashion, as you will see, that it's all right for old guys like me to pinch the fannies of young secretaries who work for us, and that the secretaries are really asking for it. And I thought that she unwittingly licensed that sort of thing all over the country. And of course, those young women are at the financial mercy of these men. And I thought it was a horrible, irresponsible thing to say, and I was, to be frank, very angry. But then I stifled my anger and said, remember, you're a humor columnist. And I think this is, what I did was, you'll be the judge, was rather devastating. But it was only because what she did was so easily devastating. But let's see if this is an example of how you can really put down a screwy idea with humor. I have to agree with Phyllis Schlafly that decent people aren't sexually harassed on the job. I know I never am. Phyllis says she isn't either, and I believe her. The 57-year-old crusader against the Equal Rights Amendment was testifying in Congress the other day. She was adamant against federal regulations that allow unscrupulous 19-year-old secretaries to file complaints against those employers who are merely showing fatherly affection when they fire secretaries for refusing to appreciate friendly pats on the fanny. How's a fellow going to be fatherly if the ingrates keep screaming sexual harassment? When a woman walks across the room, Phyllis told the fatherly old fellows in the Senate, she speaks with a universal body language that most men intuitively understand. She said the virtuous woman does not experience sexual harassment except in the rarest cases. And of course, the same is true of men like me. Like Phyllis, I have not, except in the rarest cases, been subjected to sexual harassment from the women in my office. You wouldn't believe how rare such cases are for people like Phyllis Schlafly and me. In fact, I am so rarely harassed sexually by the icebergs in my office that I confess the thought has even occurred that Phil and I might not be prime sex objects in the eyes of our colleagues. Of course, that was silly, and Phil has now wiped away that slur. She explains that it is our virtuous demeanor that spares us the indignity of a pinch as we pass through the office. Keep your hands to yourself, you hussies, is the universal language my body speaks to the shameless 20-year-old women who are just itching to get their hands on a rumpled middle-aged man. Oh, I know what they're thinking from the way they leer at that sensuous expanse of high forehead, that provocative 10 pounds of paunch, that wickedly baggy seat of the trousers. You know, it's just driving them crazy. But do they grab her paw? They most certainly do not. And Phyllis knows why. It's because the universal language of my body says no. My body speaks a virtuous language. My body keeps its frayed glands under control and speaks only the language of decent people. Of older decent people. Yes, Phyllis understands. She knows the ways of men. She knows that when she walks through the office, the immoral young devils are crazy for that hourglass figure with 57 years of sand sifted to the bottom. But do they grab her paw? Surely you jest. And why not? Because she is a blatantly virtuous woman. Because her body speaks the universal language of hands-off, turkey. Why can't 20-year-old secretaries be more like Phyllis and me? Why can't they put on a paunch as I have, or let their bottoms fall like Phil? Why can't they learn to speak the universal language of flab? Indeed, if they had a shred of decency, they would cease the sleazy practice of looking younger and firmer than Phil and me. Phyllis comprehends when a young woman whose job is at stake is pinched by a frisky old boss, it is the young woman's morals that are in question. In Phil's book, the young pinchee is a hussy. The pincher is the victim. And I can't tell you how glad I am to learn that standard, because now it can be told. I've always had a thing about Phyllis Schlafly. I've always wanted to be victimized by her. I see that titillating conservative bottom. I listen to that adorable lilt in her strident voice, and to that enticing way she snorts at the suggestion that women are legally equal. It all speaks a universal language to me. And as she has pointed out to the Senate itself, I wouldn't be attracted if she didn't want me to be. And so I say to Phyllis, I get the message, you vixen.
That's a very excellent example that you've given of how you deal with issues that. Lou, we have about a minute and a half.
Well, that is just so funny, Bill, and I think it's especially funny to those of us who really agree with the point that you're trying to make. And you have this luxury of using humor and making us all feel better and together about it. Do you think that everybody can be funny? My question really is, do politicians get to be witty? Tradition says no, but it seems like humor should be something available to everyone.
Well, that's a courteously ignorant question you're asking, because you've been around the legislature and you know that politicians are deliberately funny as well as unconsciously funny. That the legislative halls of Congress and Boise are filled with laughter. These people are constantly teasing each other.
Each other, though.
Yes, and trying to ridicule each other's ideas. I really, this Phyllis Schlafly piece, I think there's some possibility that she might see the humor in that, and if you can get people to giggling at themselves, then you've really won a point.
But supposedly...
I'm sorry to interrupt. We're out of time. The clock is 1. Bill, on behalf of our staff, I want to thank you for being on this program and with our students today. And I must say, as we've undertaken this topic of American political humor, you have made it a great success and added much quality to our college and our forum, and we are grateful to you for coming. And you've been generous with your time and your thoughts. Thank you very much.
My chicken and I were glad to be here today.
Thank you, and I thank the panel again for outstanding questions. And I want to take this chance to recognize that the subject that we're dealing with and the fun we're going to have with it really came to me from Mary Lou Reed. And Mary Lou, I thank you for that idea. It's really being a success this week, and you're always contributing so much to what we do, and we thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll be with us again next week, and we will continue to discuss American political humor. And until that time, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time. Welcome to the campus of North Idaho College and today's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
We are in the process of bringing you a series of programs under the topic American Political Humor. Today we wish to emphasize political comedy in America. In order to accomplish that goal, I am happy to welcome to the program Mr. Carl Grant from Seattle. Mr. Grant is a comedian and has several years' experience in this field. He's been on our campus today to perform before the student body and to deal with this subject. Mr. Grant is a graduate of the University of Washington and also did graduate work at the University of London. He is also known for his comedy and his performances I've indicated, and in addition to that, he is a world-class poker player and has been nationally ranked as a table tennis player. And we're very happy to have him with us to discuss this very interesting topic. Mr. Grant, welcome to the program.
Hi.
I'm happy to welcome to the panel, as always, regular panelist Mary Lou Reed, and today visiting panel member from the faculty at North Idaho College, Richard Snyder. And I would invite Lou Reed to commence the questioning.
Thank you, Tony. Carl, is it really true that you got into this comedy world through a bet?
Yes.
Would
in
you
fact,
tell us
is.
about it?
Well, I was sitting in a nightclub in Seattle with some friends watching a performer, and I happened to make the remark that I bet that I could do a better job than that.
And somebody took you up on the bet?
Right. They wanted to know how much. And so after a suitable amount of negotiation, we eventually arranged a bet for me to come down and try out an audition.
And that was how long ago?
That was about 3 years ago.
And are you glad?
Yeah.
What are the satisfactions?
Of being a comedian, the satisfactions are
Making people laugh.
making people laugh. Yeah, that's perfect.
That's pretty
That, and I think it's exciting. I always, as was mentioned, I play poker and occasionally gamble somewhat, and stand-up comedy is a little bit of a gamble because you never know what's going to happen, and I think I like that element of it also. You have your great shows and your awful shows and the whole thing, and not being able to prepare too much or anticipate too much, I think, is a good feature.
That's kind of an interesting thought. It's a risk every time?
Right, every time.
Thank you.
Richard Snyder.
Carl, I've heard you, and you're very, very funny. No joke. How do you get your material? Where does it come from? I mean, what sort of a process do you go through?
Well, I think I'm a little bit different than the average comedian. Most of them just sit down and write it out. And to me, I think verbally, and so I think I'm writing it, getting the basic idea, the basic premise in ongoing situations. And then I tend to mull it over in my head to get just the right wordings. And I actually do a lot of my work while I'm driving. I get a lot of strange looks from other cars, too, if I'm doing it out loud.
Also, Mr. Grant, in relation to comedy, I believe that yours is different than some people's in that, at least in this performance we had here today, you mix it into sections. This is a series we're doing on American political humor, and we asked that some political humor be involved, and you did about 20 minutes in that area. And then you did a segment in which you traveled around the world and viewed people from different perspectives, and then you also mixed in some things for the local area and so forth. Does comedy, as it relates to an audience, become more effective if you do a little something for everyone? In other words, everyone in the audience is not interested in exactly the same type of comedy or the same subject. And is that helpful to do that?
Oh, yeah, I think very helpful. That's one of the smartest things a comedian can do is not only do things that a large group of people can identify with, but specific people and move from area to area. Yes, I think.
But all comedians do not do this. Now, some comedians, such as Mark Russell, he does political comedy, basically, and others do not. So I am correct, am I not, that some do stress one thing or one area, whereas in your case you do not.
That's true. One thing, someone like Mark Russell, having a really solid national reputation, can afford more to draw people who want to hear specifically what he's doing. So the people who come to see Mark Russell are interested in political material, whereas with me it's more general. I'm playing different lounges and things, and I'm not really drawing from the whole United States, so I have to be more specific.
Let me also ask this question, since you do have a lot of variety of material that you use. You do have different kinds of audiences, however, although I've indicated that you have within one audience a different interest. But you do college campuses, and then you will do lounges and so forth. Do you change from that kind of environment when you go into a college campus, for example, versus a lounge where people are there for a social evening?
Yes, very definitely.
In what ways do you do that?
Well, a college audience, you'll notice I talked about college, and I have segments of things that are prepared on colleges or for any given audience. And then I'll also try to keep up with what's happening. Maybe if I get a chance, read the college paper to find out if anything specific has happened there that I might be able to make use of to make it, as you said before, to be as specific to the audience, so that when people understand exactly what you're talking about and you've just gone through some experience or whatever, then it's much easier to make them understand the humor than otherwise.
Lou Reed.
Would you talk a little bit more about audiences? What's it like if they don't laugh? I mean,
horrible, in a word. And sometimes you can have that situation. I was talking to you earlier about the incident where I was in front of a non-English speaking audience, or where their grasp of English was very uneasy. And after a few minutes of that, you could start to feel the windows frosting over. I mean, it can be grim.
Well, what are the techniques that you have in learning to read an audience? I mean, you're obviously having to respond to them all the time, and what are some of the ways that you can be nimble?
Well, one thing is to pay attention, force yourself to pay attention. At first, in doing stand-up comedy, can be a trifle nerve-wracking, to say the least. And so you have to get over that nervousness and get so that you can function in front of a large group, and then force yourself to not only look at the audience in general, but to look at individual people, see how they're reacting so that you can relate to them.
And you try to
directly.
include them whenever you can. You like to draw the audience into your act?
Yes, that's my style.
Is that something that you do, especially if things seem to be going particularly flat?
I try to do that all the time, and sometimes it becomes even harder if things are going wrong. You know, it's one of those things where it's rare that just one thing goes wrong, but you got a dozen problems. You know, you got waiters spilling drinks or whatever. So it actually becomes harder. I would try to do it most of the time, but sometimes I'm distracted and have to deal with specific things that are happening, so I'm less able to do it. And I think in tough circumstances, there's a tendency for your performance to deteriorate.
So then you just have to use those tough circumstances as material for the next joke? Is that how one responds? How do you keep your energy up?
I try and deal with the situation as it is. In other words, I don't try to pretend everything's wonderful even though I'm going flat. I try to acknowledge that and maybe comment on it or comment on whatever the problem is and see if it can be corrected that way. So other people just try to ignore it and have a set show that they're going to do, and they just go ahead and do it without reference to those things, and I personally think that's a mistake.
Are there some analogies here with boxing? Is being a stand-up comic and being nimble a little bit like boxing? Can't tie it together.
It's real tough. It's real tough.
We'll bring that in later.
From time to time, though. There's that comparison.
Richard Snyder.
Is there any tie-in between humor and business? It would seem to me that most of the businesses I come into contact with could stand to smile or laugh or something to lighten the load a little bit.
Yes, in fact, I sometimes do some workshops relating to how people can utilize humor in normal social relationships, and I find a lot of enthusiasm among sales forces because they have to deal with people, and it's very frequently an advantage for a salesman to be able to inject a little humor. So in that sense, I think humor is a great thing. It relieves stress and just makes for an easy flow. It's kind of like a social lubricant, and so I think most businesses could utilize it.
It seems to me that an overwhelming key ingredient in humor is timing. And can that be taught to someone? Are you born with it?
Hard to say. I think it's a little of both. I think some people have more of a natural aptitude for that sense of timing, which is just absolutely, as you say, crucial to humor. But it can also be developed. It can be developed by simply doing it, by practice and learning by your mistakes, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. I have some follow-up questions of what Mr. Snyder's been asking. I noticed just in a speaker we had, and you did that again today, and I was particularly impressed with that. When you did something that was particularly humorous and the audience reacted in the most strong way, you really took time out to let them enjoy it, and you didn't try to go on with the next piece of material, but you did things that added to that nonverbal communication. Some people who are involved with humor, it is my opinion that they oftentimes rush too much and do not let the audience enjoy the humor. Is this something that you have to work on, or I was particularly impressed with both speakers because you did that. You didn't rush the audience, you let them enjoy it.
Yeah, I think most people have, it's actually finely tuned. You mentioned one problem, and that's the problem of rushing, stepping on your lines, not giving people time to enjoy it. And other people have a tendency to go on and on and on. And so it's a matter of finding the right timing, and not necessarily you can make mistakes in either direction, and that's what makes it difficult.
You have also mentioned that you do workshops on this area, and I would like to take advantage of that by giving you the opportunity to give some suggestions to our audience. I think almost everyone in our audience would find that helpful. Mr. Snyder's mentioned that there's a lot of occupations where there's a lot of stress and tension. And if someone wants to become more humorous, and I don't mean to do the tour as a comedian, but just around their friends and associates, what are some of the suggestions that you would have that they could put more humor in? Particularly, some individuals have said to me, I wish I could be a little more humorous with people than I'm a little too serious. For a person like that, what would you suggest that they could do to make things a little bit lighter?
Well, one thing I have had people frequently say that I'm not a funny guy. I'm an accountant. I'm very serious and reasonable and pride myself on being polite, and I'm just not a party guy and I can't do humor. Well, actually, the description I just gave was of Bob Newhart, who was an accountant and who does utilize in his humor his serious, rational approach to things. And as such, I would say that he uses it by juxtaposing his own personality, his own straight personality, against crazy situations. You frequently see Bob, for instance, his famous TV show in which he's a psychologist, gives him a chance to play against the crazies and to react in a very rational manner to a strange situation, which in itself becomes funny. And so I would tell people to use your own personality, whatever it is. You'll find that you have resources of humor. If you don't do that, your humor comes across as plastic. You're just doing the jokes. You're doing it because Rodney Dangerfield or somebody got a big laugh with it. So I would say that would be one suggestion. Another suggestion would be only to utilize jokes that you like. I mean, if you don't like it, you're not going to be able to convince other people that it's funny. So trust yourself and go with what you like.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you've joined our program in progress, our guest today is Carl Grant, and we are continuing our discussion on this program for a few weeks of American political humor, and he is a comedian that has been on campus with our students, and we're happy to have him on this program, and we shall continue the questioning with Mary Lou Reed.
Carl, there's always this question of taste. What are some of the things that can't be said? I'm not asking you to say them necessarily, but what kind of fine line do you walk in this area of taste in terms of ethnic jokes and off-color jokes? And do you have some rule of thumb for yourself?
I don't have any rule, but I would say I do what I think is tasteful, and my particular style, as opposed to some comedians who their tendency is to try and create tension, and they'll do that by doing the off-color material or insulting some group or another. And I would describe my style as an attempt to get people to relax and enjoy themselves. So I try to do things that are not going to be offensive to people, and I just trust my own judgment on what that's going to be.
Was it Mort Sahl who says something like, "Is there anybody in the room that I haven't offended yet?" That's his style, but you avoid that.
Yeah, and I think actually Mort was being funny too. He's not all that offensive, I don't think. I didn't find him so when I've heard him. But
well, are you unusual, or do you feel that the general run of comedians now is really going to try to appeal to ethnic strains or to off-color?
Well, the vast majority of comedians do use a lot of blue material, and so in that sense I'm definitely unusual. They don't necessarily use too many ethnic or religious type material. A little bit, and certainly more, depends on the comedian.
So blues in and ethnic's
right.
passé.
Richard Snyder.
Why do you suppose people enjoy listening to comedians? I mean, somehow you must have taken that into consideration with your material. You must have to take a perspective of the audience. And not only I think it's funny, but what about those folks out there? Are they going to laugh? That's important. It's feedback. What's the universal out there that people seem to enjoy laughing and listening to comedians?
Well, I think a lot of things. For one thing, I think it's healthy to laugh. It's sort of a reliever of stress. And it just feels good. I actually haven't been that philosophic about it. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know why people laugh, but I know I like doing it. And I think that one of the reasons that I was so quick to get into comedy is that I enjoy listening to it so much.
I would like to try to pursue that, even though you said you hadn't given that a lot of thought. In our life, we run into different types of people, and some people, when we're with them, it's just part of their personality. They are just so humorous and lighthearted, and when you're with them, you have lots of fun because they make you feel comfortable and very funny. Other people you're with them, they're very tense and uptight, and they tend to indicate from their conversation with you they want you to be that way too, that they do not want you to have fun, but they want you to be very serious about everything. And since you are involved in the field and you do see these in your audience too, would you be willing to try to describe the difference in these personalities? Why are some people taking life in such a different vein or view than other people? Why would one person be so serious all the time? You can't, even when you try to make light of things, you just can't do it with that individual.
Well, if I had to take a guess, and obviously I'm not really qualified to answer this, but it seems to me that one of the basic differences is that people who are insecure find it harder to laugh or to make jokes. They're worried about what's right and what's going to look right to the people around them. And people who are more secure with who they are and who go more for what's quality instead of what do other people think tend to enjoy humor and be the best audiences. That's, as I say, I'm sure that's an overstatement, but I would guess that it's something like that, or that's a big factor.
But if the panel is in agreement, I would like to take a break at this point to give you the opportunity to demonstrate some of your humor. I'm sure there are people in the audience who have indicated to other people sitting in their living room that, well, what does he do? What is so funny? Because we've been talking about humor in somewhat of a academic and formal and even serious way. Today, when you were before the students, you gave a demonstration of a political speech. And if you were going to be running for office this fall, would you give us a demonstration of a speech that you might give based on what you've dealt with today?
Sure. May I stand?
Yes, you can.
This is a speech designed for any of you who might be thinking of going into politics, and you have to remember that one of the key things a politician must learn to do is not really to commit himself to anything. And I think this is one of the reasons that the average political speech is so vague. So I have written an all-purpose speech which you can feel free to copy down and use, those of you who might be thinking of going into politics. It goes something like this. My friends, and you are my friends, I feel that the time has come to speak out. For I believe, as I've always believed, that we will. All of us, as we have before and can, nay, must, if we are to be, and make no mistake about it, we can't afford not to be. For, and let's be perfectly clear about this, in the past few months, we have proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that we do, and will continue to do, strongly, firmly, yet gently, as we have in the past, and are quite capable of doing yet again. Need I say more? But, and this is a big but, now, and at the same time, and this is a decision only you can make, shall we? But I can hear you saying, if only it were that clear. Now I know, and here I must disagree for a moment, for where would this country be without this great land of ours? And I have the facts to bear me out. But we can't do it alone, for we believe, as we've always believed, that without the future, there can be no tomorrow. I'm sorry. Should we go on supporting foreign dictators or take better care of the ones we have at home? No. I feel that we, and when I say we, I mean us, strong in our weakness, yet weak in our strength, never fleeing from fear, but never fearing to flee, shall so strive to preserve, nay, strengthen the pillars of apathy and corruption which we have labored so long to build, and prove to the world that there are bigger and better crises ahead. Good night, and God bless me.
That's a good example of some of your humor and that you've used today, and I would think that if one was listening to that, one might say, I will vote for that person until you think what they said, and then you might decide you don't know whether you can or not. With that, we'll turn to Lou Reed.
Carl, you got my vote, and now I want to hear your favorite joke or your favorite routine. I mean, more, encore.
Oh, actually, maybe I can just do this in a discussion comment,
Okay.
because I tried for a conversational style. But one thing I have been feeling a little bit uneasy lately because I haven't had all that much commitment in my life. No, really, I feel like the kamikaze pilot who flew 36 missions. He was there and he was involved, but he wasn't committed. And really, I was reading a biography of Mozart not too long ago, and I realized at one point that by the time he was my age, Mozart had been dead for 2 years. That's kind of a thing to make me uneasy, because I've skipped from one thing to another. Now I'm a comedian, but at one time I thought of myself as a writer. I used to send articles into various magazines in the hopes that they'd be published. Now I just tear them up myself. I had one magazine tell me my stuff was so bad they had to rewrite it before throwing it away. And that was the National Enquirer. Saturday Review sent out a hitman.
That's great. That's
thanks.
great. That's great. To you, Duke.
What do you think about the condition of political humor in the United States today? Are we doing just as much political humor as we've always done? Is it downhill? Is it getting better? Are we still laughing at ourselves, or are we kind of getting tense and covering up?
I think we're still laughing at ourselves, and we've still got a lot of great political humorists, and Mort Saul still somewhat on the scene, and Russell is around, and actually quite a few comedians do some political material, and you even President Reagan tells some jokes sometimes, and they're fairly good jokes, I think. And we need a sense of humor right now.
I would like Carl to deal with a particular setting. Suppose you're in a given setting, and I would suspect this might be a lounge, and someone's probably had too much to drink, and a very aggressive person and quite arrogant, and they decided that they're going to perform rather than you. And they rise to their feet and they start challenging you. Tell me how you get control of the situation again. How would you get back in control, or can you?
Well, sometimes it's tough. I mean, some of these clubs, of course, don't have hecklers. They have snipers. I mean, they're really tough audiences. And you deal with them as best you can. And one thing that I found now that I am a comedian is that not only are there hecklers, but there's all kinds of hecklers, and you have to deal with different hecklers different ways.
Could you give us some examples of that?
Well, there's the type who is trying to help you out. And I've had some who just destroyed my act and then later told me how well I handled it, and they were really just trying to help out. And so that's one type. And they're really not hostile. You know, they're just talkative, and they don't realize that when they keep interrupting things on the setup line or the punch line, they destroy what you're doing. And, you know, it's you expect, I suppose, if these people go to the symphony, they bring a harmonica. I don't know. Go to the ballet and trip the dancers. But the other type is the type who is somewhat hostile, and that person, usually you ask them to keep quiet, and sometimes you have what they call heckler lines, or you do some insults. And I try not to insult people if I don't have to. You know, I mean, I'd rather do it in a humorous way and make a humorous comment to indicate that I would appreciate a little less talk and a little less interruption. But if I can't do that, then sometimes I'll try to get more hardcore and get the audience to support me. And it can be difficult. Some people just won't keep quiet. I mean, the person who's drunk and doesn't know that they've been made to look bad, you can't do anything with them. They'll just keep going.
Give me an example, give the audience an example of something that you might say to someone in the audience, whatever kind of example you wish, to get control again.
Well, if they're just talking, say, among themselves, I will sometimes ask them to please keep quiet because there are people trying to sleep. And sometimes that works, but if I'm on a more insulting, and I like to deal with these individually, so
right.
But depending, I might ask them if he isn't tired of having himself around.
Okay.
Sort of thing.
That's a good line. Lou Reed.
Carl, you also sing, and is there something different about putting comedy, funny lines to music?
Yes, although I would say, for one thing, you have to have a sense of rhythm, and the timing is, of course, much different because in a musical piece, you go right over the laughs. And hopefully it's written so that it gives the audience a little break, but sometimes you can't do that because it's just too, the writing of music is just too difficult. So a really funny musical piece, such as some of the stuff that Tom Lehrer does, is one of my favorite, is very difficult to write in a manner to give the audience time to laugh, so you get less laughs in a musical comedy thing.
Do you write any of your own songs?
No, I'm not that good.
Right. But you think Tom Lehrer is very funny?
I have modified them to fit individual situations. That's the most I can ever say. Yes, I think.
Do you have a little line you'd like to sing of Tom Lehrer?
No, thanks, please.
Okay.
Don't put me on the
Richard
spot.
Snyder.
It seems to me not only the timing we talked about earlier, but in order to make a joke funny, somehow it has to hinge on some sort of common ground between your life and the life of the audience. You have to call on some kind of universal situation that a person has been in. People can identify with it and then kind of magnify that, and a good joke comes off. How do you decide what the common ground is?
Well, basically, it's mostly trial and error. I mean, up to a large point, some things just don't work. Even, I've had things that I think are hilarious. My friends think they're hilarious, and I try them in front of audiences time and time again and get either a poor response or, at best, a sort of fair response. And so you have to give them up. So that's the basic thing. You have to try and see what happens. And many times I will come up with an idea, a comedy premise, and I'll realize that it doesn't apply to enough people because they don't know what's going on. And so I'll try to switch it to some other area. For instance, if I'm thinking of some of the strange things they do, say at the building department, where I sometimes have to go to get things done, I take the same kind of bureaucratic attitude and take it from there and put it in a bank or something that people can identify with.
With that, I must close. And Carl, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it very much. It's been very delightful to have you on campus and to have you before our viewing audience. We appreciate it. And thanks to the panel very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed our program and that you will be with us again next week at this very same time. I am Tony Stewart, and please have a good week.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time. Welcome to the campus of North Idaho College and today's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
To continue our discussion of American political humor, and we're very fortunate to have as our guest for this show and a second program Mr. Paul Conrad, who is the editorial cartoonist for the Los Angeles Times. And it's not very often that one is fortunate enough to have someone who is so well known and is such an expert in the field that we choose to discuss on this program. Mr. Conrad has been the chief editorial cartoonist of the Los Angeles Times since 1964. And during that time, he has received the Pulitzer Prize twice in the years 1964 and 1971. Mr. Conrad has also received 5 times the National Award from Sigma Delta Chi, which I believe is a record in his given or chosen field. He has also been a publisher of 3 books, and his works are syndicated all over the United States, and certainly many of you in our audience, I'm sure, are very familiar with Mr. Conrad and his work dealing with political commentaries and issues of our times. Mr. Conrad, on behalf of the staff, it's a pleasure to welcome you to our program.
Thank you, Tony. Pleasure to be here.
I'm happy to welcome to the panel to question Mr. Conrad on this important subject today 3 members of the panel. First of all is Mr. Richard Snyder, who is a member of the faculty at North Idaho College. Second is regular panelist Mary Lou Reed. And third is the other regular panelist, Janelle Burr. And I will invite Richard Snyder to commence the questioning.
Mr. Conrad, today I saw examples of your work, and I was bowled over by the strong, strong images that you seem to present to the public. And I'm curious, what are the hazards in sort of coming on strong? It occurred to me, you can't look at one of the cartoons. You're either for it or against it. You can't sit on the fence.
Well, Duke, I don't think there are... May I call you Duke?
Absolutely.
All right. I figured you would. What a ball player, yeah. But I don't think they're that strong. In fact, I go home many nights thinking, damn, I could have said it stronger, better. So I look at them, I've distilled as far as I can go, and for that particular, I'm always drawing for the next day. And I've distilled as far as I can go, and generally there is always a better way to say whatever you want to say. And this is what I'm striving for every day. There are none in the can. I draw just for the next morning. It's up by 3:30 in the afternoon. My deadline is 8, which gives me enough time that if something really big hits, I've got enough time to push that one back and do another one on the lead story.
Well, how about strong images in terms of public response?
Well, the public does respond. In fact, our mail is phenomenal, for and against, I might add. I think generally now they're against, but that's swinging. But I don't think, I object really to drawing, simply a drawing that is humorous, that doesn't have all that much to say, because the issues facing this country are far greater than you could ever encompass in a cartoon itself, or even an editorial, for heaven's sake. That's why I try and draw and have as powerful a message as I possibly can. I care a great deal.
I know.
Yeah.
Lou Reed.
Well, just to go on with that, you said that a cartoonist is primarily a journalist, and I don't think most of us would have said that, would have interpreted it. And why do you say that a cartoonist is a journalist? Is it just another form of journalism? Is that how you see it?
I think it's another form of journalism. The fact that we don't write, I don't want me thrown out because of that. And also I can't type, by the way, because I can't spell. So I think we are using the medium really at its best. Particularly the last few days, well, in the early days, for heaven's sakes, the cartoon was the only picture in the entire paper, if you will. The flyers, the whatever, put out by Franklin and the rest. They were lucky to have drawings. In fact, Ben Franklin was our first cartoonist, actually. Lately, the people don't have that much time to read. They watch mostly television. That's where they get their news. And I figure that I'm the guy who's paid to sit and distill and present, if you will, a picture of a situation, an issue that they should be thinking about.
Do you think that distillation is more important now when we have such a complexity of issues that people really do have a harder time cutting through the multitude of ideas and coming out with something kind of crisp?
Well, yeah, indeed, you're absolutely correct in what you say, but unfortunately, I think there aren't enough cartoonists trying to do what I do. They're satisfied in simply drawing a humorous drawing, illustrating the news. And I say you have to do more than that. You have to take a position on the issues that confront us and draw an opinion about it. Take a position. I think a great many editors, however, are loath to hire a cartoonist, buy a cartoonist, if you will, who takes particularly strong positions. In the last 2 years, I have been bought, or whatever the word is, by 145 papers and been thrown out of 144.
You have a big turnover.
Oh, it's pretty big. It's
That's
murder
tough.
on the mailroom, you see. But that's their prerogative, and somehow they get conned into taking them and decide at the last minute that these cartoons don't quite fit what I have to say, and so they cancel. That's the way it is in a free country.
Janelle Burke.
There's an old saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
How do you develop your style, or how did you in the early days develop your style and your caricatures? When there is a public character who is in front of the media a lot and you want to depict that person in a certain way, how do you develop that style? How do you develop that picture in the public's mind?
Well, if you're asking about caricature, I learned how the hard way. I was at the Denver Post during the Korean War, and they were bringing kids back to the orthopedic ward of Fitzsimmons Army Hospital with frozen hands, feet, and the rest. So I'd go up to Ward 6 and do caricatures of the kids, you know, entertain. And you either draw it right the first time and quickly, or you're out. And I stayed there for about, doing those once or twice a week for about a year at least. And I learned, you try and draw an 18-year-old kid who's got frozen toes and the rest of it. And they would always, at first, the guys were marvelous. They say, who do I do now? Here'd be a kid on one of those triangular beds so they can turn him over every 20 minutes or whatever. Always be, do him. And I learned an awful lot doing that.
So you learned then to have the empathy for the individual, and
Yes,
have you
indeed.
carried that into your work that you presently do? How do you keep in touch with the common person and the way that they feel?
Without the empathy that I learned there, I think I'd be years behind where I am now. I really mean it. I learned what war was all about. In fact, I went back to the Vietnam Memorial, which I drew against for close to 10 years. I thought that would never end. I would advise everyone to go back and take one look at the Vietnam Memorial, and you'll find out what war is all about.
Paul, in your work as a cartoonist, you do political issues and political personalities, and those change rather drastically, as you've indicated, over a period of 2 or 3 years, with the exception of something like Vietnam. Do you find that there are some years that it is much easier for you to feel strongly about what you want to do than it is? In other words, are some years more involved with issues of which you are so deeply involved? Or are some personalities on the scene that make it easier or more difficult for you to be creative in the way you want to?
If I had to choose a time when I would like to be an editorial cartoonist, I would have chosen about the era that I've worked. Although it was an absolute disaster for the country, Watergate was phenomenal. I mean, I was doing cartoons really having just the sparsest of information to work on. And after the transcripts came out, I put out a book, The King and Us, and just fitted the transcripts in with the cartoons. And that had gone on for close to 2 years. It was a marvelous time. There was particularly one cartoon about Nixon as in a spider web, if you will. And to just do a spider web is one thing, but to put 19 names in April of 72, and all of them had to be either indictable or would do time. 19, was a major undertaking that it took me at least 2 weeks to finally determine in my own mind that those 19 would be indicted, and they were, and 6 of them served time. And that was very early on, just when the break was starting to occur. And without Alfred Baldwin, it never would have broken, and Jack Nelson's story on it.
In relation to that, on the personalities that you do, would you take a moment to share with our audience, of those political personalities, which ones have been the easiest for you to work with, or that you have had the strongest ideas concerning them?
Which was the easiest? Probably, I'd say Ronald Reagan. I mean, I've been drawing him since 1966 when he was the governor of California, and I hope I only have to draw him for 1 more year. Is that okay to say that?
It's freedom on this show to say what you wish to say.
But nevertheless, I know where the man's coming from, so it's very easy. It's more than caricature, you have to kind of know where the man is coming from, which you have to read virtually everything they say, if you can meet them and talk to them, which I try and do. Next would have to come Richard Nixon and Lyndon Johnson. I'm sorry, but I thought Johnson had a fantastic potential, but to strike out to the extent that he did, I thought was absolutely horrendous. That campaign he waged against Goldwater, at the time it looked right. I was suckered along with the rest of the journalists in the country, and the country paid dearly.
Richard Snyder.
I'd be very interested. If you look back, I assume if you were drawing people during the Korean War, that you've been doing this for at least 30 years. And if you look back through your career...
I wish you wouldn't have said that.
Oh, yeah, you could have gotten along without that one, huh?
You could have let that one alone.
What kind of an evolution in style or thinking has occurred during your work? I mean, you know, back there you were doing things a certain way. Do you still do them exactly the same way? Have you,
no.
you slimmed down? Things have changed?
Hopefully, I'm learning every day. And I think the cartoons are becoming, as you said earlier, they seem to have more impact because I've got more to distill. Therefore, I can get to the point easier, quicker. And 10 years from now, I'd like you to ask me the same question.
Perhaps now the contrast in there is sharper.
Yes, absolutely. And I've noticed, in fact, there are times that I'd like to tear up what I've done in the first 20 years, and I mean it. But 10 years from now, 5 years, I hope I'll say the same thing about what I did today. There's always a better way to say it, and that's what I'm always looking for. As soon as I've finished a cartoon, I think, damn, that was a better way to say it, but I don't know what it is now, but tomorrow we'll find it.
Do you ever look back over your work and kind of analyze it, or you just drop it?
I drop it. Yeah. I try and forget everything I've done. Because I'm not interested really in projection, in the drawing, in all of this, staging, if you will. I'm interested in the issues themselves, the facts therein, who was right, who was wrong, and how could I have handled it. Maybe a little cleaner, better, sharper. Always looking, always.
Lou Reed.
Well, you're making a lot of people mad, and you have said this because you are taking strong stands. Going along with what your answer of making sharper images and feeling that you're getting better at your craft, are the responses now stronger? Are you really touching a lot more buttons because you are more effective? And you know, I'd like to hear more about your reader responses, because you gave us some examples. They're very strong.
Well, our responses are unbelievable. I've had death threats, as have Otis Chandler, because of the cartoons. Now, Tom Johnson, my new publisher, he has not had any yet. He will. We have had to put surveillance on our home and this kind of thing by the sheriff's department.
And has this increased, as I say? Have you?
Yes.
As you become more effective?
Yes.
It is getting stronger.
Also, a couple of years ago, this is something rather humorous. Is it all right?
Oh, that's what it's all about, humor.
The mail guys put a thing on my desk about this long and about this wide and about that high and kind of eel wrapped and with twine around it and stuff like that.
Wasn't ticking.
No, I checked, no tick. And so I said, what are you going to do with that? He says, that's your package. I said, I'd get the thing out of here before it goes off. So they called the cops about it finally because nobody would open it. And we have a parking lot in the LA Times. It's built kind of like a fortress. So we cleared all the cars out, and the bomb squad came over, and they have a sharp knife on the end of a long pole, and they started cutting, and sure enough, there's metal. So they decided to set it off, and they did. And it was honestly the funniest thing. It was full of dog feces in a metal box, and they're all over the parking floor. There they were, and I told them, good luck, guys, and I left. I wasn't going to clean it up. But no, the people in California really are serious about their politics. And we have a great many kooks, I think. And we have guards now. It used to be you could walk right in. In fact, I loved it the way it was with no guards. Everybody kind of keep in touch with the public. No more.
Well, your simulated bomb brings up another issue, which is not issue, but just sort of interesting thing that so many of the comments in response to your cartoon seem to be vulgar. And why do you suppose that is?
Did you notice that too?
Yeah. Yeah, they were gross.
I wish I could answer that. I don't know. They are so angry, I think, that this is all that can come out. You see, I take all my phone calls too. I have a secretary with orders unless, forget it if I'm there. And finally, if it becomes too much and I have to draw for the next day, I will cut the phones off. And I've done it about 3 times in 20 years. Other than that, I listen to all the beats. And I do that, I think, basically because I'm the guy with the forum. And the guy calling in has no forum. So if I'm going to state something, I have the responsibility to listen to the counter, which is, I think, the way it should be.
So you hear a lot of obscenities, though, over the phone.
You wouldn't believe it.
Janelle Burke.
How do you feel that you influence the public's attitude? And what kind of response do you think you get from the public as opposed to the person who is just an editorial page writer who's writing the editorial, the main editorial on the page, not the cartoon?
Well, to go to the editorial writer, they can, but on the other hand, you see, they can, in fact, they can explain the entire issue, and I cannot. I figure at the most I've got 8 seconds to present the entire case for whatever issue I'm drawing about. What was the first part again?
Do you believe that you influence people?
Do I influence
the public's attitude?
The influence, I'm not sure. I'm not sure you can measure that. I think what I do, hopefully, is make them think about their previous positions, if you will, their current position. Why is this drawing so opposed to what I believe, I think, or whatever? And this, I think, maybe is helpful. This is why the cartoons are helpful. And I do know that a whole lot of people who called me, you wouldn't believe, during 10 years of the Vietnam War, finally came around the last 6 months. They said, God, why didn't you tell us what was going on? I said, Lord, I've been drawing it for 10 years. That was absolute heartbreak to draw during that war. But I kept doing it. And finally, we got them home.
What were your prize-winning drawings?
Well, they've never picked one. They just picked the whole year.
The whole year.
I might add, I think the highest accolade that I've been paid since I've been drawing is that I made Richard Nixon's enemies list. And I was audited along with a couple other 100 Democrats, if you will. And the harassment was fantastic. I had to hire a lawyer. He was on retainer for 1.5 years to defend against them. And finally they said, we don't have a case. I said, I told you that a year and a half ago. I haven't been audited since, by the way.
Paul, when you do your work, and anyone who's familiar with it, you have given a very definite message about Republicans and Democrats alike, and you have on this program indicated some criticism of Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon and people in both parties. But through the viewers that watch this program might be interested in getting your reaction to the letters you get and the telephone calls, you will get someone who'll be very unhappy with you because that you criticize a leader of one party, but they do not take that same reaction when you give equal harsh comments to someone of the other party, and it's obvious that that's a double standard. But is this a common problem throughout the human race? Why will people zero in on thinking it's fine for you to criticize someone they don't like, but you better not touch the sacred?
Well, they're asking me to do what they themselves wouldn't do. They want, okay, you're going to kick my guy. They want me to kick my guy and forget it. I simply won't do it. My guy's time will come, you see. And if they want a balance, if the LA Times does, if any other paper does, then get an illustrator. Don't get a cartoonist. No, I will not balance on the attacks on either a Democrat or Republican. I don't want any counts made. All I want is issue by issue by issue.
I guess the point I'm trying to make is that if you happen to have a cartoon that they agree with, they will laugh and think that's funny about a political leader they don't like. But then when you do one on a political leader that they care very much for, then they direct their anger at you.
Well, they do, but I tell you this, generally those who are opposed, really violently opposed to what I do, don't see anything funny in what I do anyway. Pro or con, their beliefs. It makes no difference.
I see. Richard Snyder.
I'm curious. You work every day in an armed camp. People are sending you bombs. How do you get away from all of that once in a while?
Well, I have the capacity to turn off. And I turn off mentally as soon as I get in that car. You have to, in fact, to drive the Harbor Freeway twice a day. I really, literally turn off. That is, then I'm somebody else. And I know of nothing else other than perhaps music, and I wish I were a musician, playing at the Met, you know. God, I could see myself on one of those 9-foot walls. It's fantastic. But nevertheless, I just turn off. Down there, I'm in there to produce a cartoon. It's that simple. To read until something goes. Also, I read at home, but it's not with the same intention of finding an editorial idea. It's for me, who is divorced from Paul Conrad, the cartoonist. And I think I would be a raving lunatic if I handled it any other way. I don't think I could. When you're doing 6 of those a week, it has to be disciplined. And the unfortunate part is I scan, and to read a good book and scan it is misery. But I have an awful lot of trouble slowing down, to really absorb the way something was written, something was said. And that I miss.
Lou Reed.
Well, what about the response of some of your subjects? You mentioned that you made Nixon's enemy list, but you certainly have other subjects who are calling your publisher and trying to reach you to object the fact that they were portrayed in that fashion. Got any good examples to share with us?
Well, other than the Reagan thing, I only met Nixon once when he was vice president. And I didn't think much of him. And then, of course, through the IRS, we met. And Lyndon Johnson went back for a briefing when he was president, and all the secretaries were there. And it was when the Pope had come to New York, and remember his No More War statement? And I listened to Dean Russ go through the lineup as the funding that the United States needed to carry on that silly war. And so I raised my hand and I said, "Sir, Mr. Secretary, does this mean that you and the administration disagree with the Pope?" who said only a week ago, "No more war." And Lyndon is slouching, drinking his root beer. Turn around, and you know exactly what he said. It's fun. It really is fun to be in situations like that. That's the night he also said that he was going to have his appendix taken out or whatever the devil he took out. I wish that they would have removed the gall at the same time.
Well, do you get requests for signed and autographed examples of your work from some of the people who were subjects?
Well, from let's say the police chiefs, that's more local. The Governor Deukmejian has never asked for a cartoon. Our police chiefs, Ed Davis and now Daryl Gates, they want everything I draw about them, and there's a great deal to draw about our local police department there with their spy unit and all the rest of it, and Signal Hill Police Department, and on down the line. But no, the congressmen, they love to see their name in print too, and they also want prints or the original.
Sure, to hang on the walls.
Sure.
That's fun.
Sure, they love it. But the present administration, I will never hear from them. I have not heard from the Ford administration. I never shall. Carter, several times.
With that, to bring the program to a conclusion, Paul, and I'm happy to report to our viewers that you will be back on the program again next week, and at that time we will continue this very interesting conversation with your career. And ladies and gentlemen, I hope you will be with us at that time, and I would like to thank the panel for their outstanding questions. I hope you have a good week, and as I've indicated, that next week at the same time, Paul Conrad, who is the editorial cartoonist for the Los Angeles Times, will return, and we shall continue this discussion. I wish you a very good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time. Welcome to the campus of North Idaho College and today's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist, Tony Stewart.
Today we wish to continue our series on American political humor, and our guest, Mr. Paul Conrad, the editorial cartoonist of the Los Angeles Times. Mr. Conrad has held that position for the past 20 years, and he has been, before that, with other papers such as the Denver Post. Conrad has also received 5 national awards for excellence from the Sigma Delta Chi and top honors from the Overseas Press Club. Our guest is also published in the field that he works in. He has 3 books. One is entitled When in the Course of Human Events. A second book is The King and Us, and his last book was Pro and Conrad. Mr. Conrad, it's a pleasure to welcome you to our program. We had you last week, and we're looking forward to continuing what we felt was a very exciting discussion of this important topic with you.
Thank you, Tony. Good to be here again.
I'm happy to welcome back to the program this week to question our guests. First of all, regular panelist Mary Lou Reed and visiting panel member from the faculty at North Idaho College, Richard Snyder, and we'll commence the questioning with Mary Lou Reed.
Well, Mr. Conrad, you started out the Popcorn Forum at North Idaho College with a prayer, and your prayer was, Dear God, please help the First Amendment. Would you explain the reasoning behind that entreaty?
Well, it's come to a head recently with the Supreme Court decision on the creche, the nativity scenes in public places. I really couldn't object more strenuously to that decision. It was a split vote, 5-4, and if you will, it's kind of a foot in the door to negate several parts of the First Amendment. I'm a what did Nixon call the strict constructionist, if you will, about the First Amendment. I do not want the thing amended. I've been against the Shield law for journalists because of the same thing. Don't amend it. To my way of thinking, the Supreme Court already amended it with that ruling of this last week. Then you have President Reagan's constant call before the evangelical movement for prayer in school. Constitutional amendment to do that, to accomplish it, and first has to get through the Senate, and it could. It really could. I'm not sure it'll ever get through the House, whatever difference that makes. But with the tenor of the country today, I'm not so sure that it wouldn't pass, and it would need a 2/3 vote.
Well, what are the freedoms that you're primarily worried about that are involved in this whole issue?
I'm concerned about all the containment of religion, the right to practice, free, pray when you wish, not pray if you don't wish to speak or not speak if you wish to print or not print. I don't think the government should have anything, any holds on that or encouragement to do so. And the problem is, it seems to me, press is next. I think it has to be next, because you've already got, I think, a crack a mile wide with this Christmas thing. I love Christmas creches. The thing that disturbs me is what they did with that ruling. I'm a Catholic. What the Supreme Court said was that the baby Jesus in this creche is a folk hero or something. He turned out to be a folk hero. And actually, there's nothing religious about that. To my way of thinking, that's not so.
So that demeans the religious context as well as the
they might as
freedom.
Imagine what the outcry would be if they made the same determination about the Star of David. You see? And that will be next. There'll be a case on it. Somebody will try and
do... That's just a generic symbol?
Of course. It will become just any kind of symbol you wish. It means a great deal. I think the Star of David means as much to the Jewish people as the little creches and whatever that appear at Christmas time to the Christians. But to push it to the extent that it's okay to display these, or in fact, at this point, you have to display one, I guess, in a public place, I think is wrong. Because if I'm an atheist, I don't want to see that thing around. I've got my freedoms too. So do the Muslims. So you name it.
But your feelings, your freedoms as a Christian are really, really threatened by the taking away of the meaning.
Well, they've already told me that that in the nativity scene it's okay. Actually, that kid's name is Ralph. Not Jesus Christ, it's Ralph. I apologize to anyone watching whose name is Ralph, but nevertheless, that's what it amounts to. The whole scene has been diminished a great deal by that ruling. And it eventually will happen, I think, to the newspapers, particularly, and you can see the trend in publishing. If you handle security documents, whatever, for the CIA, whatever, involving national security affairs, you have to submit everything in writing if you intend to publish a book when you leave your job. You have to be subject to lie detector tests if you continue to work there, if there's any suspect, you see, about, let's say, a leak occurred. The president's already ordered it. I'm not sure what luck he's had in trying to determine who is leaking information out of the White House. I wonder if Nancy passed.
Does she intend to write a book?
Well, if she does, she's got a problem. That's what I mean. It's an erosion. And in every field contained in the First Amendment, every guarantee of the First Amendment is under attack. And that's where I'm concerned.
Richard Snyder.
Well, Paul, I want you to know that my middle name is Ralph, and I took absolutely no offense.
Thank you, Duke. Duke Ralph, Hadaway.
What about the book 1984? Are you telling us that you can see an erosion leading in the direction of 1984?
Absolutely, I do. I see a lot of Winston Smiths around. I also see a lot of Big Brothers around, too. And I don't think I'm paranoid on this at all. Right? Honestly, I don't. You've seen technological advances that blow your mind that have come about in just the last few years. And this is the problem. I don't know where this computer bit is going to stop. I don't think anyone else does. But with the mindset that is in the White House right now, I think it's very dangerous, because they don't think there's a problem.
So you say the administration doesn't see a problem. In fact, for whatever reasons, whether they are good intentioned or not, may be adding to this erosion of First Amendment freedoms.
Oh, absolutely. I'm convinced they're adding to the erosion, if not the cause.
How would an erosion of First Amendment freedoms affect you as a political cartoonist?
Well, one day, like if I could relate about an Egyptian journalist who showed up a couple months ago, and he's one of the big cartoonists. They don't have too many. In fact, they have about 20 papers, I think, in Egypt, and he's one of the big editorial cartoonists there. And he's showing me his stuff, and I see Mubarak, and I'll see is the back of his head. I said, well, who's this? He says, well, that's President Mubarak. I says, well, how come the back of his head? He says, well, we can never draw his face. I said, what are you saying? He says, well, look, if I may never disagree with the president, so that's out. I cannot draw his face. If I am drawing a cartoon that agrees with the president, I can only draw the back of his head. And they call that cartooning. You see, that's the difference between having the First Amendment and not. And it's not matched. The First Amendment is not matched in the British Constitution, Magna Carta, any of it. And in the European continent, forget it. I've talked to Tim Mittenberg, the cartoonist for L'Express. He draws one cartoon a week. And I had been sued for a few million prior to going, last time I saw him, last time I was in Paris. And we met, and he wanted to know exactly what happened in that suit, because under the First Amendment he couldn't understand how I could ever have been drawn to the Supreme Court of the United States and then go back to Los Angeles and have a trial, which we did. Trial taking about 3 weeks, which we won 11-1. He said, what I do under our present system is I have to approach a point, that's the line, wherever it is, and then I have to back away from it. And I thought that's exactly what you in the United States could do. You decide what you want to draw it. And because of the First Amendment, you can draw whatever you wish. That's no longer true. Mm-hmm. It's no longer true because the fact that I had to go to the U.S. Supreme Court and then come back and have a trial, every other paper in the United States, we have sent out at least 50 copies of that on request to other papers. Now the publishers are saying, oh, wait just a minute. If I run this, will I have to go to court and defend for 1.5 years to 2? And the money entailed. I have no idea what it costs to defend this one that we went to U.S. Supreme Court on. So it's a chilling effect, and it's felt all the way through. All I'm saying is it's there. It's there, and this time I think we faced it.
Paul, I'd like to pursue this issue of the First Amendment. It has often been said by some political scientists that I have read that if you had to choose any one amendment of the Constitution as the most important to democracy, it would be the First Amendment. But in relation to that, there is in political circles of political science, the indication that there's some fundamental difference today between the orthodox or traditional conservatives of the Barry Goldwater type and what we call the new right, in particular the new religious right. Would you agree or disagree with the thesis that the traditional conservatives are much more consistent with a philosophy of saying government should not become involved, and the new right is saying, yes, government should become very active in dealing with such things as requiring prayers in schools and so forth? What I'm trying to say is the new right actually asking for more active government involvement in the lives of people?
Well, I think you have two groups represented there. One group of conservatives would be the libertarians who don't want any controls.
Right.
The second would be the conservatives, the ones that I deal with most of the time. And they're activists, boy, are they ever. And they want more and more government participation. This is what I don't understand, is why during the campaign Reagan said, we've got to get the government off our backs. Well, it seems to me he's moving in force. If we're as far as this First Amendment goes, the guarantees of the Bill of Rights, anyway. And they're very vocal. Hopefully they're a fad. I'm not sure they are. There are far too many of them. But the libertarians, they're really not to be counted at this point.
So,
but the others, yes. And Reagan is, everything else has failed. His domestic policy has virtually failed. The foreign policies, the only action he's got that worked was Grenada, and that's like the U.S. invading Catalina Island, and we won that one. That's winning one for the Gipper, you know. But that's about it. So what does he do is go back to the right-wingers. The Christian crazies is all I can call them.
So in dealing with this issue, I think you've made a clear distinction that there are different groups, philosophical groups, that are some supporting and some opposing more government involvement.
Mm-hmm.
The liberals have often been accused of being for much government involvement. Would you not indicate in this given case that liberals are actually asking for less rather than more government involvement? In other words, they would be supporting the freedom of individuals on the right or the left to speak or to print. Would you agree with that?
Well, the liberals per se would want that guarantee. They want the Bill of Rights as is, and all the additional amendments. There's a question there. As for does the liberal want more or less government? Right now, they want more government and to restore some of the cuts that have been made because of budget restrictions to devote to a buildup in the arms race that the Reagan administration has pulled off.
Thank you. Lou Reed.
Paul, I'm intrigued with your lawsuits. Is it fair to ask you to describe the cartoon that actually was involved with the one that took you to the Supreme Court?
Oh, golly, Lou, I'd hate to. Do I have to describe the cartoon?
No, you don't have to describe the cartoon, except that I think we're getting away from the graphic images. And
yeah, I know. No, may I not describe it as briefly as I can?
The
1973.
Idea. Yeah, the concept.
1973, a Union Oil tanker was diverted. It was under contract, Department of Water and Power in Los Angeles. It was on its way. It was diverted, and we knew of another tanker equally close coming from Prudhoe Bay that should have been sent to the refinery on Guam, and the Defense Department could have used it. Instead, the oil was sent to Guam, and the other ship was sold, if you will, to a group in Tokyo that was owned 39% by Union Oil, and they didn't double dip, they triple dipped. And this was just in a case of a few miles on the open water. Because then the bidding, oil went sky high, and Union cleaned up on it.
So you drew a cartoon about this?
Yes.
And then they sued you for, was it slander? What is the legal point?
Well, I did it. Their president, Fred Hartley, was named in the cartoon, and he used to sponsor my Little League teams. And I figured, when he finally sued me for $4 million, what had I done wrong? Did I get the uniforms back dirty? Did I get them back at all? And I figure if cartoons can be bought for $200 a year, forget it. But see, I always lose myself in these things.
I guess what I'm trying to get at really is you said all of this sort of case has a chilling effect, and so I was trying to get into it a little bit more,
Well,
and to see if actually the laws of libel and slander are what are at issue.
Well, the fact that he was mentioned in the cartoon, then he sued for defamation of character and slander.
Yeah.
Where there was really no other way to do it, you see. The facts were correct in the case. And so he sued, and Union joined him. After we won the preliminary injunction, the appellate court upheld Union, reversing the decision. Union dropped out, and Fred went on. And he went to U.S. Supreme Court, or we did, in appealing, always on the defensive. They said, we won't hear the thing, go back and have a trial. This thing took close to 2 years. In the meantime...
I think that's a good description of the chilling effect, which
You
was that
bet.
you had to go through all these hoops, you had to go through all the process.
Oh,
when the
indeed.
issue was not really...
And in the meantime, there's no way I'm going to draw another cartoon about Union Oil. I don't care what they do. Not when we're litigants. I couldn't. For 2 years I was shut off from that. Not mentioning them in a cartoon. I don't care what Union would have done. Which, there's one chilling effect, but the fact that other papers who are marginally making dough, and there are a lot of them, aren't going to print a cartoon today with that history, saying, I may be in litigation for 2 years if I print it. So I choose not to. Easy. Isn't that tragic?
And there has been no subsequent statutory change
No.
or protection. So
No.
you were still in the process of erosion that you mentioned.
No, then it was starting. The erosion was starting. Reagan had not been elected to office then. He was then governor of California. I say the erosion definitely started when he came into office.
Richard Snyder.
I think the audience might be very interested to know that you also do sculpture work, and that you're looking for someone who'd be interested in a 50-foot California gray whale.
Isn't that a marvelous concept?
I think it's delightful. Can you tell us about it?
I'd love to. First you start with a 65-foot pool, about 65 feet long, about 20 to 22 feet wide, and 1.5 feet deep. And you build the front portion of the California gray. And there is no representation of one anywhere. And they go by Palos Verdes Peninsula, and those leviathans are the most majestic thing you'll ever see. And they come up, and so you do the front part, which will weigh 3 tons. And all it is a shell. You suspend it in the water, you stanchion it, bolt it in. Then the fluke comes out about here, and then it comes over, and it'd be about 9 feet wide. And it's over the end of the pool where people can touch bronze. They can also see these whales that they see. Every 4 minutes, it spouts. Also, I put pipes and pressure pipes in front of the whale so it looks like it's going through the water. It'd be beautiful.
Do you do anything smaller than California gray whales?
Oh, sure, yeah. I do caricature, or not caricature, but if you will, bronzes of political figures. And there's also, I want to do a crucifix, 12 feet. And I wish it were more easily described, but anyway, you know what channel steel is?
Yeah.
Okay, the U. 12 foot. Cut that out of, first you make the bronze channel. Cut Christ out of the back of the crucifix. Then, with the outline of what you have there, then you do the Christ figure stepping out of his own silhouette. I am very tired of seeing the dead Christ. Easter is what we should be celebrating, you see. The Christians, that's where they're at, not Good Friday for everybody. But he is coming out. The thing that stopped me for 2 years, I didn't know how to suspend him except by that 1 foot, no post. But then, broken ropes. Cast rope and drape it over and break the ropes and arc and the rest of it.
Sounds great.
It'd be gorgeous. Yeah. It'll be done, too.
I'm sure that some of our viewers in this area are visiting Southern California and Los Angeles. Is your work that you're doing in that area, is it on display? Is it anywhere that individuals could see it?
Well, I wish it were. I just refuse to pay. If I were doing this for a living, the bronze, I would have to go through a gallery. I refuse to pay galleries 50 and 60% for a sculpture, for handling. So I just show out of my home.
So they could, individual could contact you at the Los Angeles Times.
Oh,
and
sure.
see it.
Call me there, and I'll be happy to show them whatever I've got.
Fine. Lou Reed.
Well, what's fun about being a cartoonist? Is it fun? You know, so many of your cartoons are funny.
Well, I know they're not, but in fact, I take the cartoon you're talking about around and I show it to people and say, what do you think? Does it work? Does it work? Does it work? And they say, no, it's not funny, but my God, it works. You see? I have a little different interpretation. No, I frankly should not receive a dime for what I do. No one should have this much fun. No one. But I'll take it. I'll take the fun.
And what is the fun? Is the fun in having an opportunity to let your mind run free and then express it, make a statement?
Absolutely, Lou. I wish everyone, yourselves, everyone viewing, could have the possibility of drawing a cartoon and getting it published every day.
You have to know how to draw to do that.
Well, I know that's a problem, but there'd be. I think that people drawing would be less hostile. They'd get it out of their system by drawing, seeing it printed, and say, "Hey, there's what I think." Think what a marvelous, what a much better world it would be if we could all do that.
As a way of expressing our ideas.
Absolutely. So many are so lonely. You have an opinion on something, about something, whatever. Who do you tell? You know, that's a problem.
All right, we'll try to draw an idea for you before you go.
Okay, that's a deal, though. I might think of it next week, you see.
Richard Snyder.
Paul, how do you bring yourself to focus on something? I mean, where do you find the issues? I realize they're all around us, and you're not doing all of those issues. How do you find an issue? How do you focus? What sort of preparatory work do you do?
Duke, I read everything I can find and stay absolutely as current as I can. I scan the entire paper, and believe me, before you get to like page 6, generally I'm off and running.
Yeah.
There's something, and then the problem then is to call the library, get all the clips on the thing, get thorough backgrounding, read everything you can about it, and within a couple hours come up with a statement that says who's right, who's wrong, why, how it came about, what should happen, all of that. All of this is in a cartoon.
So there is a lot of research. This is not, you don't just sit there until some magic light bulb goes off and your hand starts drawing.
No, it needs direction.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like it's a lot of work, too.
It also needs discipline. I can't really express how much discipline is necessary to do it. And that's why when I'm home, I'm home. That's where I can work on my sculpture. I used to paint. I haven't painted in 16 years. I don't have time. I love to paint. I also play the piano. I don't get enough chance to do that. But still I have enough time at home to just absolutely turn off, play bad golf, all the rest of it. But when I get in that car, go into Times, okay, Con, where are we? Who's it? And you find out by page 6 or 8, give or take 5 or 6.
It makes me think of Catherine Manfield's short story, The Lottery, in which each year the community chooses somebody and stones them to death. Who's it today?
Sure. Who gets it today, folks? Yeah. Oh, it's a beautiful way to live. And in fact, I go back, without that First Amendment, forget it. I'd have to get into some other. I'd have to go, in fact, back to work for a living.
Paul, yesterday we had on this program and at the campus a comedian from Seattle, and he's not been in that field too long. He was a teacher prior to that, and about 3 years ago he went into the work of full-time as a comedian. He said his life changed mentally, that now as he lives from day to day, he looks constantly around him for things that are happening. When he's traveling, for example, he watches license plate on cars, and he's gotten some very humorous material that he uses from that. Although you've been in it most of your life, and his is a different experience. Do you too, in addition to all your reading, have you become more sensitive than many of us to watch all things in your life each day to gather some of the material that you use to?
I'm constantly on the look. The subconscious, I think, is always on. Absolutely all young. But I'm looking for, well, like a bag lady. I've been featuring bag ladies through the Reagan administration because to me some of these women down on the streets, on Hill Street and the rest of it, who live under a tree next to the gutter with all their possessions, I think some of the most tragic figures I've ever seen. There are more of them. Thousands are showing up down on the mission. We can't get food into missions fast enough. We don't have enough room to bed them. Yeah, I'm looking constantly.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. When you're on the program, the time certainly goes fast, and we're out of time. But thank you for coming today and being in Coeur d'Alene, and it's been most informative, and you've been generous with your time.
Thank you, Tony.
Also, thanks to the panel.
Thanks, Duke and Luke.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Paul Conrad, the editorial cartoonist of the Los Angeles Times, and with this program we bring to a close 4 weeks dealing with American political humor. I hope you've enjoyed it and that you will join us on another subject next week, and may I wish you a very good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.